to help us make dentures that look more natural, one of the things we do is add what's called stippling. Stippling is a very small roughness in the labial surface of the denture, which adds a more realistic tissue-looking surface and also helps to break up reflections of light against the smooth, shiny denture acrylic. Stippling is often done using a very small number 2 or number 3 burr, which has been offset, which means it's been bent slightly, so that instead of spinning straight, when we spin it, it's off-center slightly. And the way that I learned to do stippling was to trim dentures and give anatomy to the dentures, was instead of using a very small burr, I learned to use a slightly larger burr. So this is a number 8 or 10 or 12 burr, which has been made offset. And what this will allow me to do is trim anatomy into the denture, and this burr only hitting the denture surface at parts of its revolution will not give me a smooth finish, but will give me a textured finish that more closely resembles the denture surface. Before I do that, I'm going to open up the labial frenum very slightly using a sandpaper disc. Sandpaper discs are very useful because they're flexible and they make it easy for you to trim curves and corners. I'm going to come into the labial frenum here. I'm going to make it a little bit deeper, and then I'm going to round it out a little bit to allow movement or room for the tissue to move. Also check for buccal frenums. This patient doesn't really have buccal frenums. There's a very small possible frenum in this area, so I'll just open that up a little also. And this patient has no frenums on the mandible. That's a straight burr. And here's my offset burr. So I'm going to trim with this burr. I'm going to make my anatomy by creating a gingival collar around the teeth, and by creating a little bit of a root form by creating curving, very slight valleys, not so much grooves as valleys, which curve slightly to the distal and connect them into the peripheral roll of the denture. What I don't want to do is grind troughs in the denture that go straight to and through the periphery of the denture. I don't want to do something like that. Use a fairly sharp burr for this. This one's actually a little bit dull. Let's switch to a slightly sharper burr. This one should be sharper. So to create the stipple burr, I'm just going to take my egg burr and give the end of the burr a thump until it doesn't quite trim straight anymore. You don't want it to be too large, you want the bend to be farther back on the shaft. You don't want to simply take the burr here and give it a sharp bend. There, that's a little better. The idea when you're creating anatomy in a denture is that you're not just drawing lines as I did with the pencil. Drawing a line in the acrylic with a burr just gives you a bunch of lines. It doesn't look natural at all. So what we want to do is, instead of drawing a line, I want to remove some material, not to emphasize where I'm removing the material, but to emphasize the area around that. So what I've just done is I've just removed acrylic here to emphasize the gingival collar here. The same there. And I've removed acrylic here to create the root form here. So you're not trimming to make the feature, you're trimming to emphasize a feature close to where you're trimming. Don't trim too much around in the canine area. We want to leave that canine eminence. Some people put anatomy only in the anterior, preferring to leave the posterior segments smooth. I have a tendency to trim anatomy all the way back. The rationale for leaving the posterior smooth is that it's an easier area. It makes it easier for the patient to keep this area clean when it's nice and smooth, which is entirely valid. I'm just gently running the burr over the acrylic surface, creating slight depressions where I want to emphasize the area beside it. And the offset nature of the burr gives me the texture to approximate what the patient's tissue looks like. If you want to test what the denture is going to look like, just dip your finger in a little bit of water and smooth a little water over it, and that will give it a bit of a shine to help you see what it'll look like when it's trimmed. after I've completed that sculpting and texturing, what I'm going to do now is where I created the junction between the tooth and the denture acrylic, I have a very sharp line now, and I have the gingival collar which is sticking out, and again it's a sharp feature. So I'm very gently going to use the offset burr to round those down and blend them together just a little bit, just so that I don't have any extremely sharp features